Hello and welcome to Premier Unbelievable The Interview, the show where we go beyond the headlines and take a deep dive into the lives and ideas shaping our world today. I'm Luke Martin and today I'm speaking with Nigel Biggar. Nigel is an Emeritus Professor of Theology at Christ Church College, Oxford, an Anglican priest, and now a member of the House of Lords. He's the author of the best-selling book Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, as well as a recent book on reparations. We discuss Christianity and politics, the end of life bill, the culture wars, and a Christian response to civilisational decline. I hope you enjoy it. Let us know what you think in the comments. Lord Nigel Biggar, thank you for joining us on Premier Unbelievable. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thanks, Luke. Thanks for having me on.
Now, Nigel, you were recently cancelled from appearing at a school in Ireland. What on earth is going on? What are you saying that's getting you cancelled from schools?
Well, you need to ask them, Luke. This is, in fact, the third time this year this has happened. The story in Ireland was I was invited earlier this year, I think about 6 months ago, April, to give a prize-giving speech at the high school in Dublin in late October. I had written my speech. I was going to speak about the importance of free speech and the important role that schools play in forming young citizens who are capable of speaking freely and responsibly. That was going to be my topic. And I came back to my flat in London at about 10 p.m. And was packing my bags for Dublin. I was due to get a flight the next day at 12 o'clock noon. And at 10:38, I think, in the evening, I got an email from the headmaster, deeply apologetic, saying that the chair of the board of management, a certain Dr. Duncan Cole, had instructed him to cancel my visit. And not then, not since has any explanation been given me.
Goodness. And this is
I should say a report I've received from within the school is that what happened was a group of teachers protested about my being given the platform. You asked why. I mean, I can only assume that my views on British colonial history and my views on reparations for slavery, these illiberal teachers found intolerable. And not for the first time, an institution's management caved in to an aggressive minority of illiberal, intolerant folk.
So this is the third time it's happened. Were the other two occasions at schools, or were they universities, or churches?
This is the third time it's happened this year, this calendar
year.
Yeah,
this year,
The first time was at Regent College in Vancouver, a college I went to in the late 1970s, when again I'd been invited to give a lecture about 12 months previously, and 3 weeks before I was due to fly out to Vancouver, I got an email from the president announcing the lecture had been cancelled, again with no reason given. And I just this phenomenon of management deciding to cancel an event without giving reasons. I mean, basic courtesy says that you give reasons. The only reason not to give a reason is what you've done is embarrassing. On which my comment is, well, then why do it if it's embarrassing?
Yeah, you don't want it to end up in the press. Yeah, it's sad. My father studied at Regent College, and I'm very big fan of the college. So it's and as did you, didn't you? You studied there, so
yes, in the late 70s.
So it's sad to hear about that occasion. Yeah. So it's based on, you said, colonialism and reparations. So you wrote Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning. It turned out to be a bestseller.
Yes.
And you've recently published Reparations. So is there sort of a central theme, a central message to these two books that's got you in trouble?
Yes, look, I mean, the current prevailing progressive story as you and your listeners will know, is that British Empire, British colonialism was essentially racism, slavery, exploitation, and oppression. And therefore, we the British today owe peoples in the Caribbean and peoples in Africa, we owe them compensation for the evils we inflicted on them. That's the prevailing story. And what I say is that contains part of the truth, but it omits all sorts of other truths. For example, empire was a universal form of political organization for millennia. The British were just among the latest to get into the imperial game. Slavery was also a universal phenomenon. We may find that hard to understand, but it's true. And by the way, the British were among the first peoples in the history of the world to abolish both slave trading and slavery, and then spent the second half of the life of the empire suppressing slavery from Brazil across Africa to New Zealand. So what I'm doing is I'm telling the positive part of the story is that the current prevailing narrative doesn't want to hear.
Okay, and you're not trying to hide from the negative side. You're trying to say let's have a balanced look at the history of the West.
Absolutely. You will not find. I challenge you or any listener to find any state, whether national or imperial state, lasting 400 years as the British Empire did, which doesn't contain some very bad stuff, because empires and states are ruled by human beings, some of whom are not good people, all of whom are creatures and sinners who make mistakes. Bad things have happened. That's no surprise. And bad things happen in non-white empires as well as white ones. So I'm pushing back against really what I take to be an unfair, sometimes even racist focus on the sins of white British empires, which takes those sins completely out of context and completely and deliberately, I think, overlooks the good things: the abolition of slavery, the spread of liberal institutions, the stand the British Empire took against Nazi Germany in the Second World War, that kind of stuff.
So what are the strongest objections to your view that you've come across?
Well, one objection is, for example, Britain's abolition of slavery and anti-slavery commitment for a century and a half from the early 1800s. That doesn't make up for the 150 years worth of enslavement. To which my response is, well, nothing can make up for that. Nothing can make up for the exploitation of medieval serfs. Nothing can make up for the people who were burnt alive at the stake. I'm afraid. All of us have ancestors who sinned, and some of them sinned very badly indeed. We can't do anything to undo that. All we can do, because we're not God, all we can do is to stop the bad stuff, and then try do what we can to put it right. So that's one argument that we nothing that happened since can possibly make up for the bad stuff, which is of course true.
So I guess your objector will say, but reparations would help make up for this, the bad stuff.
Yeah, and so that makes common sense until you factor in a number of items that are overlooked. First of all, given that slavery was a universal institution practiced on every continent by people of every skin color, even freed African American slaves in the United States in 1860 kept slaves of their own, some of them. So given that, why pick on the British? And a few weeks ago, the African Union of a number of African states announced it was going to be presenting Britain with a bill for reparations for slavery, among other things, which is really cheeky because Europeans, including the British, would never have transported African slaves across the Atlantic to the Americas if it hadn't been for lots of other Africans who had raided other Africans, enslaved them, brought them to the coast, and sold them to Europeans. In other words, Africans have been involved in slave raiding and slave trading for centuries before the British arrived. So it's pretty cheeky for African nations now to look at the British and say, well, you owe us. And then another complication, Luke, is this. The claim is made that current descendants of slaves in the Caribbean or elsewhere, even in Britain, that they suffer what's called intergenerational trauma. That's to say, that they still suffer the effects of slavery upon their ancestors 200 years ago. Therefore, we British owe them some kind of reparation or compensation. But here's the thing about time, look. An awful lot has happened in the intervening 2 centuries. I imagine most of us have ancestors who were put upon 2 centuries ago, who were victims of some kind. My people were Covenanters in southwest Scotland in the 1600s, and we had to worship in the hills because our worship was banned. We fought battles that we lost, and we were hunted in the hills by government troops. So my ancestors were victims. Do I suffer their pain? Do I suffer trauma because of them? All I can say is not obviously, because so much has happened between now and then. And for example, Barbados, most of its citizens are the descendants of slaves, is doing very well now compared to the citizens of Nigeria, and much better than the citizens of Jamaica. In the first case, Nigerians, some of them were descendants of slave owners, and here are the descendants of slaves doing better than the slave owners. And if intergenerational trauma was indeed a thing, then the descendants of slaves all over would suffer more or less equally, wouldn't they? Well, they don't, because other things have happened.
So your first, but I mean, you've written many books, academic books, but I guess perhaps your first book that was written for a more popular audience, Colonialism. So it was a bestseller. And you've got this recent book on reparations. Why did it become a bestseller? Why is this work on the history of the West, the history of Britain, why is it so relevant now? What's capturing people's interest, do you think?
Having become a bestseller, it is it is answering a demand. So lots of people wanted what I regard, and what some other reviewers have said, is a balanced, even-handed view. I mean, you said earlier, look, I'm not pretending that the history of British colonial or imperial endeavour was nothing but good. It wasn't, and the book makes that perfectly clear. But people wanted I think a lot of people intuited that the prevalent narrative, the entirely negative narrative, was not balanced, and I think a lot of people were relieved to read something that told them the whole story. As for its wider importance, the reason I first became interested in writing about colonial history was the referendum in Scotland in 2014 on whether Scotland should become independent and whether the United Kingdom should disintegrate. As an Anglo-Scot, look, I was a natural supporter of the union of Scotland and England, of the United Kingdom. But I felt obliged to look into the reasons that Scottish nationalists put forward for Scottish separation. And one argument I came across amounted to the following equation. Britain equals empire equals evil. Therefore, the Scots need to purify themselves of this wicked British entity and sail off into a bright new, shiny, sin-free future. But having read British imperial history for about 20 years, I knew that the simplistic equation, empire equals evil, was just not historically tenable. But the point was, Luke, that I realized that colonial history was being used for political purposes, was being abused, in my view, for political purposes that I regarded as destructive. And that's why I thought to myself, 11 years ago, someone needs to correct the record. I didn't, at that point, plan for the someone to be me, but it turned out to be. So there was that. And then more recently, as we've alluded to, the CARICOM, the community of 15 Caribbean states, and now the African Union, are presenting 10 Downing Street with considerable bills, considerable demands for reparation. That according to the Brattle report, the UK owes Caribbean nations something like £18 trillion. So again, the narrative about British slavery is giving rise to a political demand, which certainly puts Britain on the diplomatic back foot, insofar as British diplomats believe that the Caribbean nations have a case. I don't think they do, but I imagine many of our diplomats think they do.
Okay, so it's politically relevant at the moment. A lot of our viewers are Christians, some are curious non-Christians. Why might this issue be relevant to people who are interested in theology, questions of faith, the relationship between Christianity and wider society? Why would this issue, sort of the history of the West, and in particular the history of Britain, be relevant to such people?
So I think there are two reasons why such people should find this of interest. One is if you are Christian and if you are simply progressive, then you believe, rightly so, that the victims of the world need attention, they need voice, and they need support. I think probably most people can agree with that. And so if it were true that Britain had spent 400 years raping and pillaging all over the world, and if it were true that the descendants of the subjects of British Empire suffer the results of that, then it would be true that justice requires that we British now should do something to make reparation or compensation. So I think anyone who's Christian should care about victims, care about the poor. But the question, and of course, anyone who's Christian, they will find the idea of confessing sin and doing penance for sin perfectly. That would make moral common sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But my argument is yes, of course, but when you're talking about things that happened 200 years ago, and you're talking about not personal sin but collective sin, it gets a whole lot more complicated than that. The other reason why Christians in particular should have an interest in this is that it's often said, well, I suppose the reputation of Christianity is bound up with the reputation of empire, because it is often supposed that or claimed that Christian missionaries were the agents of empire, that empire promoted Christianity, and therefore, insofar as empire was wicked, then Christianity was complicit. So the reputation of the Christian church and of Christian missions is at stake here. And my comment on the story I just told, the complicity of Christianity in empire, is it wasn't like that. First of all, imperial officials tended to be rather irritated by Christian missionaries, because Christian missionaries often irritated and disturbed local peoples. When local peoples were disturbed, the poor colonial officials had to deal with the disturbance. So for colonial officials, often missionaries were a nuisance. And often missionaries were severely critical of imperial and colonial policy. And then finally, I mean, the idea that missionaries pushed the Bible down the throats of helpless native peoples at the point of a gun is complete nonsense, because most of the missionaries, a lot of the missionaries in Africa, for example, were were in the territory of native peoples outside of colonial government, and they were completely isolated. They didn't have the power to push anything down anybody's throats. And the fact that there are now 700 million Christians in Africa has a lot to do with African choices, not with imperial coercion.
Fascinating. So, Nigel, now I guess you'd say at a late stage in your career, a year or two ago, you became a member of the House of Lords. You're doing a lot of this public work. You've written these books. You have a Substack, which we'll put in the show notes, with weekly articles, I believe.
Yep.
You're writing in the papers a lot, and of course you're putting forward your views in the House of Lords. Let's think about what led up to this stage of your career. How is your training? What was your training? How has your training prepared you for the work you're doing now? And how is sort of some of the academic works that you wrote over the years that obviously didn't become bestsellers, because no academic book becomes a bestseller.
Sadly not.
On average, 2 or 3 people read each academic article. I'm sure yours were read much more than that.
Maybe 4 or 5.
So all that work has sort of been leading up to the sort of more public work you're doing. How has it prepared you for the work you're doing now?
In fact, the academic career I embarked upon for political reasons. So actually, I regard myself as extraordinarily privileged, because I feel as if my retirement from academic life and my entry into political life is the fulfillment of all that I've been as an adult. Because there I was, I wasn't brought up as a Christian. My first act of rebellion was to become a Christian at the age of 13, much to the benign bemusement of my non-church going parents. And then 10 years later, I came up to Oxford to study history in 1973, at the height of the bloodshed in Northern Ireland. I had to study for my first exams by candlelight, because there was no power, because there was no coal for the power stations, because the miners were on strike. I had to learn to drink my tea without sugar, because there was no sugar, because the docks were on strike. It was a national crisis. And really, I asked myself then, so what has 2,000 years worth of Christian moral reflection got to say to this national crisis? And to cut a long story short, after leaving Oxford, I decided I wanted to study theology, and that's why I went to Regent College in 1977. I then went on to the University of Chicago in 1979, and I discovered that ethics is what I needed to study in order to answer questions of what should we do, what should we do about this national crisis. And really, the whole of my academic career has been, and was intentionally, a means of preparing myself to be able to say something Christian and moral about public affairs. So it was 10 years ago, about 7, 8 years before I retired from my academic post, I started writing for the Times newspaper. And in fact, even before then, I had begun to write for Standpipe magazine. So the idea of writing for a general readership outside of academe and commenting on public affairs was alive and well and taking shape 10, 15 years ago. And so my move from, as I say, academia into political life was a natural one, and I'm really glad to have made it here. I may never write another academic book. I mean, I use academic books to work out what I think. I've worked out what I think in a lot of things now, and it's time now to spread the word and write more accessible books for people who are perfectly intelligent but just don't have the time to wade through academic tomes. And so my book on colonialism was the first one of that. My book on reparations was the second. I have another one coming out in February on the culture wars, and two more coming out when I've written them next year and the year after. So I'm, as the Americans say, I feel as if I'm cooking on gas right now.
We need to take a short break. Make sure you're following us on social media. That's at UnbelievableFE on X and at Premier Unbelievable on Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube if you're watching rather than just listening. And if you're enjoying this new show, do leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back after a short break.
We are launching a brand new course which helps us to consider the evidence and questions around the birth of Jesus. It's called Did It Really Happen? The Birth of Jesus. Why not sign up for the course or gift it to a friend? Find out more at premierunbelievable.com.
Excellent. Yes, I love it that in a sense you're drawing upon decades of study, of teaching, of discussing this material with students and colleagues, and it's all coming to a head now. I think we're living in an age where many sort of 21-year-olds are becoming influencers, and I'm all for young people getting involved in the conversation, but there's something to be said for really sitting with the questions for a good deal of time. So let's then get into some of the practical work you've been doing. You've been involved in the Academic Freedom Bill, the bill that has to do with freedom, academic free speech in the universities. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, Luke. So I'll go back to the beginning of the story, which began in December 2017. This is when I completely naively walked into the culture wars because I'd launched a research project called Ethics and Empire in Oxford in July 2017. This came to the notice of a then reader in post-colonial studies at the University of Cambridge, Prem Gopal, who on the 13th of December 2017 tweeted to her colleagues in Oxford and elsewhere, OMG, oh my God, this is serious, SHIT, we need to block capital, shut this down, referring to the Ethics and Empire project. And then that launched 3 online protests in the space of 7 days, the last of which was addressed to Oxford University, urging them to take the project out of my hands. I can go into gory detail about that, Luke, but the main point is that's when I realised, to my shock, that we in universities, in British universities, had a problem with free speech being repressed or being under threat of repression even by salaried professors in our universities who could not tolerate, and let's be clear here, could not tolerate other people hearing what I had to say. It wasn't as if they were being forced to listen to me, because they weren't being forced, but they couldn't tolerate other people listening to what I had to say, and so they wanted me shut down. So that was my baptism of fire, and in May 2019, I ran a conference in Oxford under the title Academic Freedom Under Threat, What is to be Done? And we had about 50 people attending, with speakers from North America, South Africa, and elsewhere. And at the end of that conference, one of the people present, representing the Legatum Institute in London, said, if you want to carry on this conversation about what is to be done, then Legatum is at your service. In October, about 20 of us met at the Legatum Institute's premises in Mayfair. At the end of January 2020, one of our number, Toby Young, founded the Free Speech Union UK. I have an interest, I'm chairman of it. The Free Speech Union UK, 5.5 years later, now has 40,000 subscribing members, enough resources to take the UK government to court, and has spawned sister organisations in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, Switzerland, Canada, and I think probably shortly Germany. And that alone has transformed the landscape, Luke, because whereas before people like me who were being bullied by online mobs felt completely isolated and helpless. Now, if we find ourselves under attack, we can have recourse to this nationwide body, the FSU, who will come to our help, perhaps even help us fund a legal case. So that's made a huge difference. That started in end of January 2020. In 2020, the same group, the Academic Freedom Group, met with the Minister for Universities to talk about legislation. That then helped to inform what became the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act 2023, which it took an awful long time to get through, about 2 years to get through Parliament. But it got through, and it will make a big difference. I mean, the change of government in July 2024 brought with it the shock that the Secretary of State for Education, Bridget Phillipson, announced she was going to pause the operation of the Act, perhaps to repeal it. And we all thought, oh my goodness, all our work's going to be wasted. This is politics, of course. But because a group of us who cared about free speech had got together and organized, because of the Free Speech Union, we were able to, for example, persuade 7 Nobel Prize winners to write a letter to the London Times newspaper protesting against the Secretary of State's threatened action. And the long and the short of it is, through various forms of resistance, the Act has come into operation in part and will come into operation more fully, although there are certain bits that the government has lopped off and will lop off. So it didn't get through entirely, but it will run. And that again, I mean, but both of these initiatives, both the FSU and the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, both of them began with a group of people saying to themselves, we have to do something. Then with that group of people, aided by bodies with resources, like the Legatum Institute, for example, providing resource to support them. And then latterly, in the case of the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill, then Act, connections with government. But government had to be persuaded from the bottom to act. But I when people ask me, are you despondent about our situation? I say, no, I'm not, because I've seen what a small group of people can do over 66 months to make a real difference. And the other reason I'm optimistic, look, is when I scrutinise the arguments of those opposing me, every time I scrutinise and I think about it, I come away thinking, no, we're right. We're right. And so it gives me a great deal of confidence to know the other side really don't have much of an intellectual leg to stand on.
Interesting. And so this issue of your engagement with politics alongside the question of optimism leads us to the end of life bill that's currently going through the House of Lords in the UK. Some Christians would argue that we're sort of moving towards or promoting a culture of death. Some people would say that the fact that this bill is going forward has suggests we should be pessimistic about the direction of Britain, about the West. What are your thoughts on that as somebody who's actually participating in the debate in the House of Lords?
Well, again, Lord, look, I'm not as pessimistic. I mean, my own view on assisted suicide or euthanasia is more nuanced than some Christians. I do think, and I particularly through my thinking about military ethics and reading about military history, I do think there are cases, certainly on the battlefield, where voluntary euthanasia is the right thing to do. But I'm quite clear that I do not think that normalizing that, institutionalizing it, legalizing it in normal circumstances is wise, which is why I oppose this present attempt to legalize assisted suicide. Now, it was said before the bill, which has gone through the House of Commons, before it came to the House of Lords, those who have led the opposition in the past felt that the mood of the House of Lords had changed, and there was much more support for legalization of assisted suicide than there had been before. But I took part in the second reading of the bill. The second reading is when most of the general discussion of the bill takes place. The third reading is more discussing particular amendments. So the general discussion took place in the House of Lords on the assisted suicide bill, and there were a very large number of speakers. I think, was it 140? So we all had no more than 4 minutes to speak. But 2/3 of those who spoke against it. And now we're in committee stage where we discuss amendments, and there have been over 1,000 amendments put down because the bill coming from the House of Commons was so poor. It is claimed by the supporters of the bill, the House of Lords has no business defying the expressed will of the elected House of Commons, and therefore we should not hinder this bill. We can try and improve it, but we are bound to pass it. To which the response has been made, and it's one I endorse, that first of all, between the second and third readings of the bill in the House of Commons, the majority supporting it halved because more and more MPs became doubtful about the safeguards provided by the bill against abuse. In the end, if 12 MPs had voted the other way, it would never have come to the House of Lords at all. And several MPs are on record as saying, well, we're going to push this up to the House of Lords in the hope that they can sort out the mess we're sending them. To which my response is, well, suppose we can't sort out the mess. Are we bound to pass this? Anyway, so the dispute about what the constitutional authority of the House of Lords is, but there is a strong case to be made that we can actually say, well, we're not going to pass this. But so just back to the general point you were making about, is there reason to be pessimistic about Britain, about the West, because this bill will pass, and it's another sign of the gradual corrosion of humane civilization. Well, I think it would be if it did pass, but I think there's a good chance it won't, or at least it may run out of time, and if it runs out of time, it falls. I mean, there's lots of reason to worry about the state of the West, Luke. But I remain, well, partly as a Christian, I think despair is forbidden; it's not allowed. And secondly, things can look very bad indeed, but you just don't know what's going to happen. And for those of us who follow the man who was nailed to a cross, you just don't know what's going to happen.
So you're not a Peter Hitchens.
I'm not a Peter Hitchens, no.
Peter Hitchens, for our viewers and listeners who aren't aware, Peter Hitchens, a British journalist and Christian, is very pessimistic about the future of Britain. I believe he just wrote an article in the Daily Mail saying, "Get out while you still can," to British people. So
right.
different perspective offered by Nigel. Okay, so let's broaden out then and think. We've thought about academic freedom. We've thought about end of life. Let's think more about Christianity and politics, because this is becoming a big area of debate in both Christian circles and non-Christian circles. What's the relationship between Christianity and wider society? So let's start off with something more general. How do you envision good engagement between Christians and the wider society they find themselves in? What are the dangers? Let's start off with something general, and then we can get more specific.
Yeah. Well, what does good engagement look like? Look, I just published an article critical of the remarks made by the Archbishop of Canterbury about Israel's war in Gaza as involving genocidal acts. And in the first paragraph, I say, I yearn for the day when bishops in my church, bishops in the Church of England, or Christian leaders will address an important issue that no one else is paying attention to and say something about it that no one else is saying. Instead of, in this case, in the case of the Archbishop, adding his voice and saying something that lots of other people have already said. And I think I make clear in the article, I think it's a mistake to describe Israel's actions as genocidal, even if I think they may be wrong, but they're not genocidal. One danger is that, and certainly I think the Church of England bishops are guilty of this, is hitching their wagon to progressive crusades. Partly because they want to appear fashionable, partly no doubt they believe it, because lots of our elites are unreflectively progressive. I just wish the church would stand back a moment and try and say something no one else is saying. So I think that would be generally prophetic, because one of the marks of prophets in the Old Testament, and in the New, thinking of Jesus, is that prophets tend to speak words that other people don't want to hear. And the Bishop of the Church of England tend to say things that Tories don't want to hear, but people on the left do. I just wish they'd switch sides from time to time. So I think it's important. We as citizens, we, like everyone else, we have a dog in this fight. We need to be invested, and I think the record of people who belong to churches, I think social scientific evidence shows that we do tend to be more involved, if not at the high political level, then at the local level, and that is as it should be. Because we need to care for God's world. So there's a danger that when we speak, we tend to just end up adding our voice to an already strident chorus, and I wish we wouldn't. I mean, the other danger is we become bitter and pessimistic, and I think my own view is we're forbidden to do that. Frankly, it's indulgent. There's lots to complain about. But there's also good stuff. I think we're not gods, so we don't know the future. And although, as it were, fighting a lonely fight might look like a waste of time, the truth is you just don't know what the effects of what you say and do are, and therefore you should speak the truth and do what's right and let God work out the consequences.
I think we need to have you on for a debate with Peter Hitchens on Premier Unbelievable's weekly debate show to have that out. Yeah, I think this is more of an issue in America, where people get concerned about the mixing of Christianity and politics, in particular where Christian leaders or Christian pastors say that Christians should vote for a particular political party. And it strikes me there's probably times in the past when that was true. So I think under in Nazi Germany, I think it would be right for pastors to say you should not support this political movement, the movement of Adolf Hitler. That's in extreme situations. But I think, that's the criticism at the moment when Christians will say the Christian must support Trump, or I don't know if you get it much on the other side, Trump, so support Kamala at the last election. Do you want to speak to that for a moment, that sort of Christian engagement, but maybe holding short of saying God definitely endorses a particular candidate?
Yeah. Well, I'm now a conservative peer, so I am a public member of the Conservative Party. I do what I'm told to when I'm asked to vote. But do I think the Conservative Party is the vehicle for the establishment of the kingdom of God? No, I don't. Nor do I think the Labour Party is, or any other party. Do I find that there are members of the Labour Party with whom I feel a greater affinity than some members of the Conservative Party? Yes, I do. So I don't think you can say, except in very extreme circumstances such as you referred to there, look, I don't think you can say a Christian must vote for this party or that party. It depends what the issue is. But I do think Christians need to be committed. I mean, for many years, I wasn't a committed party member. If I only joined a party quite recently, formally, because I preferred to hedge my bets and vote according to the issues. But there comes a point where I think one needs to become committed, and whether it's committing yourself to a church or to a political party or to a marriage, they all involve compromises, and they all involve biting your tongue. And I think it's I've always admired, ever since my final year as a student of history in Oxford, when I took a course on the life and times of St. Augustine. I've always admired St. Augustine, who was anguishing over his political responsibilities as a bishop in late Roman North Africa, and because bishops sometimes had to exercise judicial functions, and he was anguishing over this and saying, and he quoting Psalm 51, I think, if only I'd wings like a dove, I could fly away and be free of all this anguish, all this having to grapple with dilemmas, all this having to cope with trade-offs. But he didn't fly away, and he stayed involved and suffered the anguish and the pangs of conscience. And I think that's the right thing to do. We shouldn't stand on the sidelines and be moralistic judges. We need to get stuck in, because God did. I mean, that's what the incarnation of God is about. God got stuck in first century Palestine, flesh and blood.
And in doing so, you're going to be working with people who, on some occasions, you may disagree with. You may even object to their character in different ways. Oh, yeah. But there is there's a pragmatic element to politics. Yeah.
the mind and brain are connected, but the scientific data doesn't enable you to establish the nature of that connection or the relationship.
Just because science can't demonstrate that physical processes and mental processes are the same thing, that in and of itself doesn't give you any evidence that that's not the case either.
Some people talk about seeing deceased relatives and communicating with them.
This idea of floating up out of your body and watching things happen and being able to describe it afterwards, that could be formed in your imaginative mind.
Conscious experience and brain processes are two fundamentally different things.
I wonder if we're talking about...
Would you like me to go out for a bit? You guys seem really happy.
Yes, so when we're thinking about Christianity and politics, it raises the issue of Christian nationalism. I was at a conference on Saturday. They were talking about sort of renewed interest in Christianity amongst people in the West, particularly the young. But some people were concerned about the rise of Christian nationalism. And I was sitting there, I was thinking one thing that would be good to do would be to define exactly what we mean by this term, Christian nationalism. I think the people raising it were sort of referring to movements like the raising of the flags and the way at some of these sort of big mass protests, people are carrying crosses and all that sort of stuff. So I thought I'd throw it open to you, Nigel. What are your thoughts on this term? How do you define it, and is it a threat or what is it?
So look, for some years now, I have been explicit in describing myself as a British patriot. And I'm a British patriot as a Christian. So I suppose I endorse a form of Christian patriotism. And part of what's involved in that is that as a Christian, I don't believe any nation is eternal. No nation is divine. Nations come and go. The UK didn't exist until 1801. Czechoslovakia ceased to exist in 1993. But nevertheless, nations may embody important elements that promote human flourishing, and those elements, those institutions, those nations deserve support and sometimes defence. And I believe the UK is one such. So I'm a patriot, and I've been saying that explicitly because for the whole of my life, I have known that in my middle-class, educated university circles, to describe oneself as a patriot is to invite a sucking of teeth, as if you've just said you're a fascist, and that is profoundly unhealthy. That reaction is profoundly unhealthy because it seems to me to be absolutely right that those of us who are lucky enough to live in a country as prosperous and liberal and humane as Britain, we need to be grateful for that. We need to appreciate it, and we need to be committed to defending and promoting the good things here. So I'm all in favour of a Christian, therefore qualified, national patriotism. I could call myself a Christian nationalist, but of course that carries connotations, doesn't it? But here again, I reflect that Scottish nationalism, Irish nationalism, and Welsh nationalism, in many circles, especially on the left, are all rather cool, are rather sexy. English nationalism, British nationalism immediately connotes fascism. So my question, and I want to answer it, is why? Why? So I don't call myself a nationalist simply because of the connotations.
And what are those? How do you understand those connotations?
Oh, I think National Socialist, frankly. I think nationalism in educated, probably left of centre circles means racism, Above all else, it means racism. It means arrogance. It means contempt of other countries. It means Little England. Of course, it doesn't have to mean any of those things, but that's the connotation. Whereas I think patriotism is entirely healthy, and it's about time more of us owned up to it.
So would you say there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism, or are you using these words almost interchangeably?
I think there's a difference in connotation. So that's why, because of what the word nationalism connotes, particularly on the left, I think it's best not to. I could use that word, but then I'd have to define
all the
what
caveats.
I don't mean by it. Patriotism, it's a bit easier because it's not unusual to talk about patriotic Labour voters, for example. That's a bit easier. But I haven't really addressed the issue of Christian nationalism, Luke, because as I understand that's a term that's come into use referring to what's going on in the United States, primarily. And there's an association of Christian nationalism with the right. Now, I stand on the right somewhat, but there may well be versions of Christian nationalism that imagine some kind of a restoration of an explicitly Christian constitution, maybe the constitutional banning of abortion, for example. And then we can argue about the rights and wrongs of that, but there could be a vision for something rather like the Constitution of the Republic of Ireland up until recently, explicitly Catholic. And I think there are problems with that. I don't think it's realistic in the current cultural climate, apart from anything else. So it depends really on what content is smuggled into this concept of Christian nationalism. I've also heard there are some educated English nationalists or English patriots who think that you can't really be English unless you are ethnically English. So Kemi Badenoch can't be English. So Rishi Sunak can't be English because their ethnicity is not English. And I've not heard that directly, but I heard it reported to me by an historian who was quarrelling with these people who are articulate educated people. And I have to say, I think that's wrong. So you can have a kind of narrow ethnic nationalism, and I think that's a mistake. Because I think different ethnicities. I don't care what someone's ethnic origins are, so long as they're fully committed to being British. And I've no doubt that Kemi Badenoch, in some ways, appreciates the value of Britain in a way lots of white middle class Tories don't. So ethnicity is not required for citizenship, I think, but commitment to a certain culture and certain institutions certainly is required.
Interesting. Yes, I'm aware of that movement in America. I think it's Stephen Wolfe wrote The Case for Christian Nationalism. And over here in the UK, I think the concern is around sort of the Tommy Robinson movement. I have heard that there's an increase in interest amongst Robinson's followers in Christianity. I assume the concern is that him or his followers would just take Christianity and use it for political means. But it's definitely a subject that I think needs further consideration. Tied into it, then we have this whole question of the culture wars. In a sense, your work on academic freedom means that you're involved in the culture wars, these wars over free speech, gender, sexuality, history of the West, etc. Some Christians say Christians shouldn't take a side in the culture wars. They should aim to be winsome. That's an objection that's raised. What do you think of that? I mean, you've talked about getting involved and being practical. In this particular, I think a lot of people will agree that everybody, including Christians, should be engaged in politics. They should vote. They should try and fight non-violently for justice in most cases. But what about these particular culture wars? Are they a distraction? Are they just sowing division? What do you think?
Huh. So, well, yes, of course, wars are divisive. People take sides. But there are some who look at me and say, Biggar's divisive. I've had that said about me very early on. And I was really puzzled as to what on earth did they mean. And the conclusion I came to, why was Biggar divisive? Because Biggar was giving expression to certain views about colonial history, about reparations. So Biggar's divisive. Now, what could that possibly mean? Well, all it can possibly mean is that in certain circles there is an unquestioned consensus, and along comes Biggar, and he's disturbing it. Right? So yeah, if there's an unquestioned consensus, then a dissident is going to be disturbing, and therefore divisive. But my view is that because the views I'm opposing are wrong, and because the people who are threatened by my views, for example, in December 2017. Immediately went to use political means to shut me down. Aren't they being divisive too? I mean, when I hear this complaint about this picture of the culture wars is being fought between two sets of fanatics, and we sensible people should stand above it, I refer them to the case of Kathleen Stock. Now, Kathleen is a gay feminist philosopher. She probably does not vote Tory. I've never asked her who she votes for. But she was gender critical. I mean, she believes that sex is a matter of biology, and she was critical, therefore, of the notion that you can simply, by looking into your inner self, you can identify yourself as, if I'm a biological male, I can look into myself and I can discover that I'm really female, and that's what I am. And she was saying, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, she taught philosophy at the University of Sussex for 18 years. Because of her views, she was subjected to a sustained campaign of vilification by a group of students, plastering posters around campus calling for her dismissal. Some of her academic colleagues joined in or supported this campaign, more or less. And the university administration failed to support her. So after 18 years, and after a campaign of vilification, she was so disturbed by this, she felt she had to resign both her post and her career. Now, who was being divisive then? Was it Kathleen Stock giving voice to an opinion that most people in this country, I think, regard as common sense? Even the Supreme Court has said it's common sense now, as if we had to wait for the court to tell us. But she got driven out of her job. Who was being divisive? So no, folks, being winsome is not enough. Now, I grant you, and this is something I've had to learn, and I try and maintain my dignity. One has to maintain one's dignity. You have to be careful not to be unfairly aggressive. You've got to be careful not to become insulting or needlessly provocative. So one needs to be disciplined and fair. But no, you can't stay above the fray. You either you're for one side or the other, or what is happening is an aggressive minority is trying to repress the likes of me and Kathleen Stocks and others, and an uncertain majority is watching and doing nothing to help us. So I regard the uncertain majority, the people who want to be winsome and don't want conflict. If our culture is becoming increasingly illiberal, it is their fault because they're doing nothing.
Hmm.
Do I have time for one quotation?
Sure. Yep.
My next book,
The New Dark
February
Age.
next year.
Oh.
I quote Martin Luther King in the front, and he said this in 1958 about the civil rights movement. History will have to record that the greatest tragedy of this period of social transition was not the strident clamour of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. And that applies now.
Yes, it does strike me that when we look back at previous historical episodes, we've got, I don't know, Wilberforce involved in the abolition movement. You got Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany. You have Martin Luther King with his fight. That a lot of people these days, with hindsight, will look at that and say, no, it was good to take sides. But in our current moment, people can feel a bit on edge. They're hesitant to do so, and I guess in some sense, some people are waiting to see how things go. Is this gonna turn out to be one of those issues that I'm really glad I took a side on, or is this going to be one of those issues that I didn't want to take a hit to my personal brand or whatever by taking it aside when it turned out to be a molehill, not a mountain. I think in terms of objections, I guess if you're a pacifist, so you're just opposed to war and conflict altogether, perhaps you're going to say, you're going to want to stay out of things, even though that the culture wars that you're referring to are non-violent. But I think the other part is this sense of winsomeness, this desire amongst Christian leaders to try and make the Christian message have as wide a reach as possible. And the argument is, if you're getting involved in one of these battles, then you're going to put off those who disagree, or even just put off those who don't like conflict, which applies to many of us. You've spoken to that. Do you want a quick word in response to that? Or?
No, I fully understand. Conflict is exhausting, Luke, and one has to choose one's fights. And lots of people may not think that they have a dog in the fight over colonial history, for example, or transgender. I get that. Although if a Labour government agrees to start paying reparations, then every taxpayer is going to have a dog in that fight. And I think we ought to care about whether giving puberty blockers to young children to make irrevocable changes to their bodies is right or not, because otherwise young lives are being ruined, and there's some evidence that some youngsters who did that now regret it. Although it's very hard to find anyone to fund research to prove that right now. So I get the fact that people don't want to be involved in conflict because it's costly, and church leaders want to be appealing. All I'd say to church leaders is, I get that, but there is a question of the truth, and there's also the question of justice. You have to. These are issues of truth and justice, and I think you can't stand on the sidelines, and you have to be courageous enough to make up your minds. And by the way, although you will suffer a lot of barracking if you go against progressive positions, my strong hunch is the majority of people in this country and elsewhere will agree with you. So although you're trying to keep everybody on board, you can't actually, because some people will come to despise you for your lack of courage. You can't win everybody. You've got to take some risks. And goodness me, the Lord we claim to follow, did he not take huge risks?
Yeah, it is interesting at the moment what works and what doesn't from that perspective. And I mean, I think with Charlie Kirk, really interesting fellow who was sadly assassinated a few months ago, he got involved and he had absolutely huge reach. So moving towards our last point and thinking, actually, I'll bring up Ayaan Hirsi Ali herself, self-described culture warrior. Her background was in Islam, radical Islam. She fled a forced marriage, ended up in Europe, was for many years sort of a poster girl of the new atheists. And then a year or so ago, she declared that she had converted to Christianity. And when she described her conversion, there was definitely a personal element to it. She was coming out of I believe it was a difficult experience of depression, but there was also a civilisational element. She said that the West is facing three threats: radical progressivism, I guess what some people would call the sort of woke stuff. Number two, radical Islam. And number three, the expansionist projects of China and Russia. So she felt there were these threats to the West. And what's needed, in her view, is sort of a return to Christianity, to the roots of Western civilization. For hundreds of years, the West was built by Christians. Our cathedrals, our universities, our schools, our laws, our art, our music is all heavily influenced by Christianity. So it just raises this final question of what role should Christianity play? I mean, you may disagree with Hirsi Ali's views on the threats that we face, but I assume at least on the radical progressive front, you've got some sympathy from what you've said. So what role should Christianity play in this sort of retrieval of Western civilization?
In fact, I agree with all three of the things you say Ayaan holds. What role should Christianity play? Well, I do think that the liberal, humane culture that we in Britain and elsewhere in the West we have enjoyed does depend on a number of things that Christianity holds to. I'm not necessarily saying that Christianity holds them uniquely, but Christianity does hold to them. And I do think we need to recover those and own them again. So yes, I think a recovery and promotion of the ways in which the world around us that we take so much for granted, the Western world, does depend on certain views that are Christian is really important. I mean, Tom Holland was saying as much in his book on Dominion, called Dominion, and people can own Christianity in a variety of different ways for a variety of different reasons. Some more personal, some more cultural. So one doesn't have to be, I don't think many church-going Christians are, as it was, sign up to every clause of the creed with equal enthusiasm. As we said earlier, like joining a political party, you join up because you think this institution, this tradition, has got its finger on the pulse of some really important things, even if some other things you're not sure about. So there are all sorts of reasons that you may have for identifying yourself with the Christian church and Christian tradition. And some people may say, well, in my head I'm an atheist, but my heart draws me. I say, well, fine. Sometimes your heart knows better, and sometimes your reasons take time to catch up, as the 17th century philosopher scientist Blaise Pascal said. So yes, I do think we need to recover. I mean, we have to make some choices here. We can't remain swimming in the kind of soup of radical relativism and multiculturalism. We have choices to make, and we have to find reasons for our choices. Because I think Ayaan Hirsi Ali is right. If we carry on down the road we're going to find ourselves living in a world a whole lot more hostile and alien than we ever imagined.
Fascinating. Lord Nigel Biggar, thank you so much for joining us today on Premier Unbelievable. For those who want to follow you, where can they find you? Twitter, Substack?
Yes, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Substack. And then I write for the press and I write books.
So go for a Google, and we will put those links to the books, etc., into the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us today, Nigel.
Thanks for having me, Luke. I've enjoyed it very much.
That's it for today's Premier Unbelievable, the interview, where we bring you deep conversations at the intersection of culture, theology, and personal story. We'd love to know who you'd like to hear from next and what questions you'd like me to ask. So get in touch at unbelievable@premier.org.uk or follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. I'm Luke Martin, and I'll see you next time.